Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on our Open to Happiness podcast. I am your host, Nicoleta, and today I will be joined by Cassandra Geisel, a mental health advocate and death educator, a native Canadian living in our beautiful London. We will be talking about the relationship between mortality and happiness today. And I must confess, prior to meeting Cassandra, I never even thought of exploring this topic, but I remain very, very curious about it. So, hello, Cassandra, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I cannot wait to dive in. I think this is a very unique sort of meeting of two topics, and I'm really sort of excited to explore it because I think it's really important. So yeah, I can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you so much for connecting. Your profile intrigued me, so I said I must meet you and I must talk to you because I feel like I want to know more about you. There's something out there that is pulling me towards you. So let's start by finding out a little bit about you and your journey in life. So who are you and how was your journey up until this moment?
Yeah, wow, what a beautiful question. I love that question because I think getting a glimpse or a snapshot of a person is always so nice. So I guess I would start by saying growing up, I was always quite a quiet kid, but always like very involved with everything happening around me. But always sort of fascinated, I guess, by what people would consider maybe darker topics or themes. And that was from a very, very young age, whether it was sort of like the books that I was picking up to, the conversations that I was willing to have. And that theme has kind of followed me throughout my life. And it's been really exciting because I get to sort of explore sort of areas that maybe previously haven't had like a light shed on it as much. So it's really exciting to talk about this too, because I think it parallels with my mental health journey, because there's been points in which my mental health has been definitely not the best. And also it's really difficult, and to be able to sort of look at the darker side of things, it also comes with kind of looking at the darker sides of yourself too. And so my mental health journey has kind of followed along with my interests. And so I went to university where I studied criminology and religion and sociology. And that was kind of a beautiful little package. And it really kind of got me interested in, the outskirts, I guess, of society. And so with that, I focused and did research on serial homicide. And I did that with Dr. Sasha Reed, who is absolutely iconic. She's a developmental psychologist, and she used a lot of phenomenology in her work. And really kind of the work was to break open and really understand the perspective of people that commit, sort of atrocious and really like unspeakable crime. And it was in that we also did a parallel project with missing and murdered people in Canada. And that was using a database that eventually incorporated AI. And that picked up on patterns of missing people. So to potentially reveal if there was any sort of serial homicide action happening in the country, but also just to pick up on patterns if anybody was, particularly missing, certain demographics, etc. And what that revealed to me was that people are not treated equally in life, but also in death. And that really, really was prevalent in the Indigenous communities in Canada. And that kind of sparked this interest in death and dying for me. And I really just kind of never looked back. I just was like, okay, we all deserve to be honored and thought of and respected and considered to be the full complex human beings that we are. And we should all be seen as such, not just certain people that maybe look like me, white, middle class, and so that was kind of the gateway. I moved to London after that to do a master's in criminology with forensic psychology. And as much as I love it and I'm fascinated by it, I really struggle with the criminal justice system personally. I think really black and white. And I kind of struggle to see where I fit into that very black and white system. And so after I finished my degree, I sort of thought, what's next, And it was kind of serendipitous how it happened. And I apologize. I know I'm sort of speaking quite a long time, but
Let's do it.
give some context. And so I was working a part-time job simultaneously while studying, and a magazine came into the hairdresser shop that I was working at as an assistant randomly. And on the cover was a funeral home. And that magazine, random local magazine, changed my life. So I opened it up and I read through, and the ethos was exactly how I imagined. I was like, look, nobody talks about death and dying. Why is it so archaic? Why is this an industry that stayed stuck in so many ways in the Victorian times, but has also been sort of dominated by modern capitalist sort of big conglomerates that have just kind of sucked up all of these little sort of mom and pop family owned independent funeral homes? So it's this very interesting dichotomy that you have going on, because nobody wants to talk about death and dying and what happens there. So the industry has kind of stayed in quite an old space, but then you also have these big mega corporations just buying up all of these little places, and it becomes quite a transactional, not human process. And so this funeral home was incredibly unique in its ethos. It was like life affirming, people led services. And so I just sent them a letter. I'd never had funeral experience or anything like that, and I didn't expect to get a response. But it was midway during, or actually right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I got an email saying, "Would you be interested in coming in?" I had sort of no idea what I was signing up for, but I went in and we met, and like I said, that ethos was there. So going into that space, the funeral home space, completely changed my life in terms of the way I saw death, but it also completely revolutionized my mental health personally. So that is kind of why I think I got so excited thinking about death and mortality and the link to happiness and mental health, and how sort of crucial it is, because it really sort of revealed to me, at the end of the day, everything for me comes down to a death anxiety, this serious sort of fear that I'm running out of time. I'm not doing things to the best of my ability. And why does that matter? Because one day I'm not going to be here to experience it or to do it or to try. And so working intimately with the deceased gave me this sort of beautiful, also really confronting and difficult kind of challenge and experience to really sort of look at myself and look at, my past experience with, say, suicidal ideation and, self-harm and addiction, all of it, which I have experienced. What is going on here? And like, what matters? I think that's what kind of really came to the forefront. I was like, what matters? One day I'm going to be on this table that I'm looking at. One day someone's going to be dressing me and putting me in a casket. And what can I do then now with this time and this sort of life that we've been given? And so since then I've worked in crematoriums, and now I work in suicide prevention, and I'm training to be a psychotherapist. But that was sort of the biggest blessing I ever could have kind of imagined. So yeah, that was a long-winded thing, but to get to sort of where I am now, it's really important, I think, to sort of understand. It really started with like social injustice, and it kind of, and it's still there. That's kind of like underpinning everything that I try to do. So yeah, that's kind of the snapshot into me.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. I can say that I find you very, very interesting. Your ideas are so fresh and progressive. I think we need more people like you to show up for themselves, show up for the world, and share their inner turmoil, share their inner struggles, share their dreams for a better world, for a different kind of future for us and for the generations to come. And I truly agree with you, as being in this world of psychotherapy for 2 decades and psychology as well. I can look inside into my own life experience and the professional experience that I've captured and the social experience as a human being living in the world. I would say that I completely agree with you. Our most fundamental fear is the fear of death, because that's the ultimate threat that we all face in a way or another. And any other minor threat would potentially lead to that. So
Exactly.
that's so beautiful, the way you explain how your journey took you to this point. And I think maybe we can, if you agree, we can talk a little bit about your own mental health struggles and how has this journey helped you unstuck yourself from that kind of tunnel where you found
Yeah,
yourself trapped at some point in your life. But
absolutely.
but what I find so amazing is that you talk about something I've never heard. So I've not been, exposed to this ever before in my, readings or anything else or in my work. This idea of fair treatment in life and death. I mean, this is very novel. It's very
Mhm.
unique
Yeah.
because when I think of discrimination and prejudice and equality, social equality and all sorts of things, you think about people that are living, that are
Yeah.
here with us, that are sharing this life on earth, but we never think about what's happening after. And then when you talk about minorities, and obviously you had your own experience, we know what happened in Canada,
Yes.
America as well, and different other
Yeah.
modern Western worlds that have been built on a lot of blood and suffering, and
Exactly.
the transgenerational trauma is still carried by those that have survived and are now living with us in this world that we've created, which used to be their world, the world of their ancestors, the land of their ancestors, and they now have to face, all of this painful past that we all share.
Mm.
So very, very beautiful. I absolutely love it. So you're now interested in exploring the fairness beyond life, and you're working in crematoriums, you're working for funeral companies, so you have that experience, you understand what's going on. At the same time, you have this interest in, obviously, in forensic and criminology. You want to know probably, and now in suicide as well, in suicide prevention. I think you're working for a mental health charity at the moment,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yep. Yep.
Treating mental health, okay. Which is so beautiful. So you're getting involved in all sorts of projects that are helping you go somewhere.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go?
Yeah. That's a really, thank you for being so observant, I guess. So I guess what I've been trying to do is get as much perspective as I can into the end of life sort of realm and sphere, whether that was in the funeral home, the crematorium, or now dealing with suicide. It all sort of opens up a bit more into kind of what's going on, where are these sort of injustices, what is the landscape that we're working with in terms
Yes,
of death and dying, and how are we having these conversations when they're really, really difficult. And I think that's my sort of primary goal, is to really sort of start the conversation and start talking to people and saying, look, this is hard, this is really hard, it's uncomfortable. Why is it uncomfortable? It's uncomfortable because it touches something very primal within all of us. It's also beautiful in the sense that it's the one thing that binds us all together, right? And you can relate to anybody about this, and that's what I really love about this sort of sphere, is no one is exempt,
yes,
everybody's included. And so with that, you can sort of really get an informed idea of what it looks like for different people. And so my sort of end goal, I'm currently training to be a psychotherapist. So I'm really hoping to focus that sort of work
hmm,
in the sort of death and bereavement sort of sphere,
yes,
but also really use like a community informed way of practicing and sort of kind of rejigging and looking at what systems have been working, what hasn't been working. Is a clinical approach always appropriate? Is it actually a community thing that we're missing? Ritual, ceremony, these things
yes,
that have been all sort of forgotten and left, as we become more and more secular, more and more
yes,
individual. Again, I can bang on about capitalism forever, but it really sort of promotes this idea that you're meant to be a self-sufficient, sort of singular being, when actually we're the best when we're in community.
mm,
And that is magnified by social media, that disconnect,
yes,
living online and really sort of seeing everything through this filtered lens and feeling less than and othered. And I just think through death and through conversations around death and dying, you can really bring people together and say, look, why don't we imagine like a different sort of way this could be done? And I think it's different. I think it's different for everybody, depending on, your background, race, sexuality, gender, all of it can inform a really beautiful and unique end of life experience. But what's great about talking about this, it's also a conversation about life, because you're looking at, okay, well, life happens and it can end at any point. And I think
Yes.
that's the thing that I realized, and it hit home for me so strongly, was there's no rhyme or reason. Sometimes it's, we have the privilege of making it to old age. Sometimes you don't. And there's no sort of, I guess, meaning attributed as to why some things happen to some people and not. It's really kind of existential stuff where it's like life just happens. There's suffering, there's pain. And so for me, you asked about my mental health. My mental health, I think my journey up until now has been a really interesting but tumultuous one as well. It was around, I think, 14, 15 that I really started struggling with depression and anxiety, and also with alcohol abuse. And so I was quite young, I think, when everything sort of kicked off. And I think actually you're seeing it sort of younger and younger these days, just due to access, constant comparison, constant sort of like information. It's just too much information, right? I just can't imagine that it's great for our brains. But for me, so I was around 15 and that looked like a variety of different things. But for me, that was like, at that point, sleeping like 18, 20 hours a day, very barely taking care of myself, a lot of self-harm in my personal story, which is kind of, it's there's distance between that, so I can talk about it comfortably. But I struggled with that, and I struggled with alcohol, and it took me until 2022. It was 2019 when I stopped drinking. But that was something that I struggled on and off with. I was overwhelmed all the time with existential guilt. Existential guilt and fear and just confusion of, this world is like, it's hard. And this is the thing. But I always thought, and this is the point on happiness, I always thought I was wrong for not always being happy. Not realizing that happiness, just like any other emotion, is something that you flow in and out of. It's not a constant, but you can set up things in your life to make it a bit easier to access happiness, but it's not a guarantee. It's not like and I think you're sort of sold that, right? That you always have to be happy. There's something to achieve. There's always something to do. And that maybe you're wrong for experiencing these more difficult or dark emotions. And it was only really sort of in current years where I've been really looking at that and being like, no, these are just human emotions, right? This is a very human experience. It's human to be scared. It's human to be fearful. It's human to be angry or sad or confused. We're beautiful in the sense that we can have that range, but none of them are wrong. And I think we really like to pathologize everything, and especially these days, I see it sort of more and more, is that any sort of feeling that's not optimal or productive is pathologized, and it's actually no. We're all beautiful, complex, multi-layered people that are just experiencing life. And so it was really the funeral home changed everything. Working intimately with the dead, really, it flipped everything on its head in terms of my suicidal ideation, especially, and just general sort of. And it's not to say it's never there. It's not to say it doesn't ever come back, but I have a different relationship with it now. I don't judge myself so harshly. There's compassion. Compassion is there for myself when I'm feeling not so great, instead of this constant sort of critical voice of you should be doing this or you should be feeling that, all of these expectations that I was kind of placing on myself. Society, I'm sure, yes, you feel a type of way because there's all of these things you should think you should be doing. But also at the end of the day, I was really beating myself up. So it's like bringing in that element of compassion and just realizing that time is precious, and like life is beautiful when it's bad, sad, happy, glad, all of it. That's just that's a human experience. And so, yeah, it's been a really sort of interesting journey, but also, I guess, a really important one. And it feels worthwhile for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. It means a lot to talk openly about this, because very often we hide.
Yeah.
We put these masks on and we come in out with our social persona, we pretend, we fake life. We present ourselves as being different than who we are.
Yeah.
And I feel that you're right. Again, it's human to struggle. It's human to to feel lost. It's human to feel stuck. And when we learn to get programmed in this way, and we function by automatic pilot, without knowing ourselves very well, without having that connection with the self, it's natural to really live in a dysregulated state and not know
Yes.
how to bring yourself back into balance. Because no one, you see, you've been through so much education. You're doing your second MA now in
Yeah.
psychology. And I've been studying a lot as well, and many other people that are in this branch do the same. It's always, professional development, more courses. You want to learn, you need to learn all the time to upgrade yourself. And I
Yeah.
think that's valid in any industry these days,
Yes.
with the
Yeah.
pressure that you get from the outside world, with this, um, economy and the capitalism and everything
Yeah.
that makes it so difficult from a day to the other. But I think all this education, formal education, doesn't teach us about life. You learn nothing about yourself, about how to cope with life,
Yeah.
about who you really are in the world, and how is your journey, what kind of hardship you might face in terms of loss and relationship struggles, which are so inherent. I mean, you can't
Yes.
go through life without all of this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we will face them. But I find it very beautiful that you talk about embracing that unpleasantness that comes within, rather than denying it or using other defense mechanisms
Yeah.
to make sense of it on an intellectual level or so on, or even suppressing it,
Yeah.
and keeping distracted and busy with other things. I think you're talking about embracing it, sitting with it,
Yeah.
trying to get to understand it, see what's going on inside of you. What is this about, and what is this bringing into my life? There is a lesson there. And only when we actually confront our fears and our darker spaces, we get to know ourselves and find a way towards balance and yoga and unity and everything that is beautiful in life. And it's bringing a sense of well-being, which I'm feeling that you found. You
Yeah.
discovered yourself through your own suffering, which is
Absolutely.
amazing. And now we're moving into the topic. Why are we really so afraid of talking about that, and why is still that a taboo topic these days in the 21st century,
Mm.
from your learnings?
Yeah, it's an amazing topic, and it's so rich and so juicy, and I think there's so much there. I think firstly, I think the biggest thing is, like I said, it always will inevitably touch on a very primal and instinctual fear. We have been taught through so many different ways to avoid. Also, it's this sort of feeling and thing that it happens over there. Death and dying happens over there.
To other people,
Right.
not to us.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think we've done ourselves a disservice through the medicalization as well of death and
Yeah.
dying. So this has become sort of a massive industry. More people are dying in hospital or hospice or care homes than ever before, whereas before people used to die at home. So just having the proximity to death, it doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
Somebody dies in a hospital, they're immediately brought to the morgue. There's not that intimate sort of experience and time where you get to be exposed to death. And of course it's uncomfortable, and I'm not saying that it has to be there 24/7, but just sort of natural interaction with death and dying, it's not there how it used to be. And again, that also touches on the community aspect as well. In the grieving process, we don't do justice in the same ways that we used to. We don't have those same sort of rituals. And that's why it's so beautiful to have religion. Sometimes I feel very envious of people that have a solid faith, because it provides a beautiful sort of platform and landscape to have ceremony, to have ritual. And so we really, I think, what can be exciting in the future going forward is to think, what can a ritual look like for you? What is non-secular ritual? What ceremony, elements of ceremony can you bring in that feel right for you? But I do think that sort of out of sight, out of mind, death is happening over there attitude and mentality really just cuts us off. So we haven't had to interact.
Yeah.
And I think with COVID, it kind of changed, because I do believe in the past couple of years, it's the first time in a really long time you're seeing death tolls on the TV. You're kind of always talking about it. And also there's a threat with COVID, right? I think that's the thing, especially when it first sort of emerged. There was this threat that we don't know kind of what's happening. We don't know how severe or how not severe. And no one, again, is exempt from this, right? It's not, this happens to certain communities, like, say, for example, the stereotype with the AIDS crisis. This is something that could affect everybody. And I think it really has invoked feelings, a collective sort of death anxiety, rumblings of it, because it's the first time it's been sort of topical, I guess. And then following on with that, you have like what's going on in Ukraine, all of it.
Yes.
And it feels like death is kind of being pushed, but in a very scary way. Anytime you hear about it, it's kind of terrifying. And seeing it in movies, film, etc., it's always this like dramatic or violent representation of death and dying, and we don't really ever see what is like a day-to-day death. And so again, it's the proximity. It's kind of been designed that way. It's been designed to keep it from us. And also not knowing your rights in terms of interacting with the body. Are you allowed to have a funeral at home, etc., etc.? People sort of have these set kind of beliefs that they think have to happen, or things that need to take place. But actually, there's quite a lot of flexibility. And so somebody passes away at home and you want to stay for a couple of hours with that person, you're allowed, and so there's all of these kind of smoke and mirrors, which does people a disservice, because A, you're not informed because you just don't know where to go to get informed. And B, it's so far away. When it does happen, it's always an emergency. It's always a shock, but death actually isn't an emergency. It's already happened.
Yes.
But we treat it as such because we just don't have the tools to respond. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now, is this kind of crux, I think, an opportunity to really sort of shift and be like, we can re-empower ourselves, we can reacquaint ourselves with death and dying. And through that, also, what beautiful conversations can come out of that, speaking to parents, friends, my poor friends and family probably want me to shut up about it. But every 2 seconds, I'm like, what do you want? What do you want? But you get to like learn so much about each other by having these conversations. What matters to you? What do you want at the end of your life? What is important in that space, and you can enhance the relationships you've got going on right now by having these conversations too. So it's kind of like a win-win, really.
Yeah, so great. I mean, I can relate to that because I've been going through breast cancer, quite aggressive and terrible illness a few years back. Wow. And I thought I will be dying, and I prepared myself for that. And I started having conversations, and people were very, very shocked around me. They said, don't talk about that, you're going to survive. I said, yes, I would love to, but what if? I mean, there is always that kind of, a negative prospect, unpleasant one. So let's prepare for everything. But we are not prepared to have this conversation. And I think this is beautiful that you're talking about how the corona and now the wars that are coming into the media more often, like the one in Ukraine, because others, we don't hear too much about them. There's always been wars. They remind us in a way, they come as reminders of our mortality, because we tend to live like life is forever. We don't stop to think about the end, never, unless we hear, oh, someone died. Oh God, that's terrible. But we suppress it straight away. We block it and we We get busy with other things, and that's our anxiety, obviously. I think what you're describing me is so beautiful, to have that chance to have a conversation and be informed as a family member, being left behind. What would they like, to have towards the end of their life, and what about in death? How do they want to be treated, and respected and cherished after they are not here in the physical form?
Yep.
I remember that I read at some point, I don't know if it was World Health Organization report or something, that in the US, 30% of the health bill goes towards the end of life. So people that are really towards the end of life, we are trying, there isn't I don't know, we have this pressure to actually insist on treating people that are towards the end, on their last days. And we use all sorts of invasive treatments and
Yes.
surgeries and needles and all sorts of procedures that are not respectful towards the body and are not really changing anything, because the death is imminent. But it's our attachment to, you see, to holding on to them and having them with us the ones that remain behind. And I think these intrusive and aggressive treatments do them no good, and keeping them, as you mentioned, medicalizing everything, keeping people in the hospital on their last days, do not allow them for that space, for peacefulness, for a review on their life, for having those meaningful conversations with their dear ones, about leaving them with, maybe with some beautiful memories towards the end, rather than the memory of seeing them dead already in the hospital bed or whatever. I think it's very important to really celebrate this last stage of our life and discuss about it and plan it. I certainly did, and I keep talking about it now
Yes.
because I was faced with that imminent death
Absolutely.
at some point. But most people that I meet find it very difficult to talk about it. And clients in therapy, you would probably explore that yourself as you plan to work with grief and bereavement. People are really terrified of being in that space because
Yes.
of their own fear of death.
Absolutely. And I just sort of wanted to touch on something like that you just shared. Also, thank you for sharing about your breast cancer, but also highlighting that in terms of how isolating it must have felt, to want to talk about something, to want to share, to want to acknowledge what's happening in the reality, and to be sort of met with the other people's fear. That's kind of what happens, right? Is
Yes.
their fear blocks the connection.
Yes.
And that, I think, is where we just kind of failed, to be honest. And that's why it's so important to just keep talking. So thank God that you did, sort of push through and say, no, look, this is important to me. Let's have these conversations. And it also is empowering to be able to have these conversations and say, this is what I want. Let's talk about it. Let's have these conversations and really push it forward. But also and what you just described about the transition at the end. Also, I think another thing that I like to think about is we kind of experience mini deaths throughout life. Grief is something that we think is only associated with the end of a physical body.
Mm-hmm.
But I also really like to reflect on grief is actually familiar. When you think about any transition that you've had, childhood to puberty, puberty to adulthood, ending a job, ending a relationship, ending anything, any ending is difficult.
Yes.
We really
Yes.
struggle with the end. And so
Yes.
the more we talk about grief and endings and getting comfortable in that sort of raw, vulnerable space, again, you're opening up a chance for connection that might get missed out of fear.
Yeah.
So it is just like death and life. They're like these two little fish that swim beside each other. They're not totally separate. They're not, like some people refer to it as bookends. But actually, like, I do really think there's a lot of integration. It's not just you're born and then at the end you die and then stuff happens in the middle. I do think you get flavors and tastes of different types of death kind of throughout too. And that reflects on your mental health, right? When has your mental health been better, or when has it been worse? Was it when you're experiencing an ending or a massive transition in life? Again, and then it's natural.
Yes.
And you give
Absolutely.
yourself permission.
Absolutely. So lovely. I feel that our lives are somehow filled with losses from the very moment until the
Yes.
very end. And I think the culture and our conditioning, since we are very little, is trying to protect us, wrongly and falsely protect us from facing the negative emotion or engaging with the true reality of our existence. And it's such a massive loss in itself, because we
Yes.
don't get used to facing losses and transitioning through them, moving past them, transcending them, which is the point of everything. Even life, it needs to be transcended somehow. Otherwise, what's the point of this? And I think culturally, even if we have therapy now, psychotherapy and psychology for a good number of years, over a century, ourselves, the people in the field, we still struggle to make sense of our own existence as human beings before putting the hat of the psychologist or the therapist. And I think this is where we need to do a bit more work ourselves,
Yeah.
to get more comfortable and familiar with discussing about all of these topics, so we can sit, with more confidence in front of someone that brings such a massive pain and distress into the therapy room. But now let's see how we move into the happiness
Mhm.
realm. Because
Yeah.
if we confront our mortality and we acknowledge that we are mortals, what did that say about us? That means that we are on borrowed time. It can happen anytime. We are at risk in every moment. So can it be that maybe acknowledging our mortality prevents us from embracing happiness?
Yeah.
What's been your experience around this? Can you accept death and still be happy?
Yeah, I think that accept word is kind of the key, right? I think there is nothing sort of more terrifying than this idea that we will no longer be here. And it's because it's the unknown. We have no idea. We have no idea what it will feel like. We have no idea what that actual transition will be like. We have no idea what's happening after.
Yes.
Maybe nothing, maybe everything. No
Yes.
one knows. But where I think the happiness aspect comes in, I think it can be a really beautiful tool, your mortality, to really identify kind of what is happening in your life and whether or not that is serving you.
Yes.
And I think that's where the happiness element comes in, because I do know that, being mortal kind of sucks, right? Like, I mean, I ideally, but actually, I don't know if ideally you would want to live forever, but that having that underlying anxiety and fear it's a lot to reckon with. But you can, I think, channel it into something a bit productive, in the sense that, what do you have in your life? What's set up? Your job, family, partners, where you're living, what you do for fun, all of these things, saying yes to things when you actually don't really want to, or saying no when actually that's a fear-based no, and maybe you should put
Yes.
yourself out there a bit. you know all of these things, you can kind of weigh it up with the lens of mortality. I think, you can really sort of push it forward and think, is this how I want to be spending my time? Is this who I want to be spending my time with? What does it look like for me to spend my time optimally? What
Mhm.
is the most, and it can, I sometimes fear, I understand that there are also really important life circumstances that might prevent you from having the liberty to kind of choose always where you go or what you have to do. There are so many things that affect that. But I do think it's about, okay, looking at your situation and just finding those little bits of freedom where the choice is, at any variance of that. Some people have the liberty to completely design every aspect of their life, and that's, a massive privilege, and that's beautiful. But, there are some things that are just givens that you have to do
Yes.
because of your circumstances. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because I think with sort of this ideal world, you can get you miss a lot of people, and they're like, well, that doesn't really apply to me because I have to do this because I have children, I'm a single mom, and I have to do XYZ. There's so many things. But what I can say is you can still use that mortality sort of compass as a tool to sort of think those little decisions you do have power over and you do have control over. What is serving me and what is speaking best to my soul. It's and again, it sounds quite up here, but it's true, right? Because you light up when you do things that feel right and feel aligned.
Yes.
It's draining when you do the other things, or when you say yes to something when you actually, your heart's not in it. Or so being able to use it as a bit of a tool to assess what's going on, I think that's where the opening happens to this idea that it's about being content. Right? Because I think, again, happiness, beautiful, amazing. Achieving it, amazing. Going in and out of it, amazing. But also, you can like use the mortality compass to kind of think, well, where can I set things up so that I feel just content? And I look at my life and I think I did myself justice, and I did right by myself, you know? And I think that can be really empowering. And I think that can really help with your mental health.
Fantastic. I find it very impactful. I think it's important to stay in the present moment and accept the reality of our human existence. Because the more we keep ourselves busy and distracted and occupied, and the social media, the modern world, the digital world is very easily doing that with all of us, capturing our attention all the time and keeping us wired somewhere. Yes.
Yeah.
But I think the more we do that and we live, this present moment that arises right now and is bringing life into us, I think the less we give ourselves the chance to live the best life possible. I think to live a good life, it's about being mindful, accepting what is and cannot be changed, surrendering to the reality of our lives, talking about that as being an occurrence that will happen in the future, that doesn't have to destroy this very moment that we're living right now, and we can create it the way we want. Because if we stay in the anxiety of the future, a potential unpleasant future, or in the suffering of the past, of the events that have happened already, in those memories, we are somewhere else. We are not in the present moment, and there's no way we can feel the aliveness and vitality. And we should give ourselves the chance to really feel that aliveness and vitality, because that's the point of being alive. I mean, if you keep, running away from the concept of that and the reality of our mortality, that's not going to help us, because you end up at the end of your life still very unfulfilled. 2 decades ago, I was a clinical psychologist in a palliative care hospital, and I work with the dying every single day. And every day there would be another one that has gone. I would find the empty bed in the morning. I started to develop anxiety myself, going into the world and trying to search and see who's alive, who's gone by now, because I happened to be the last person that they would talk to, especially meaningful conversations about life. And I found it that it's really unpleasant when you reach the end of your life and you didn't have the chance to maybe do some relational repairs, maybe work on yourself a little bit, maybe understand a little bit the purpose and the meaning of your life. And it's not nice. I think it's important that we talk about it. I think I've not heard of anyone to be a dead educator. You're the first one. I haven't Googled it to see if there are other people around there, but I think you're starting something that will grow big, and it will have a massive impact on the society, on our lives. And I hope other people will join your movement and will continue to help, because so many people, I mean, we have 150,000 people dying every day in the world. So there would be many families, probably 1 million people around the world would be part of the close family that is now going through that horrific experience. And every day that's repeating. So there's always people that need support. We need support. We need to have someone that is able to hold us through that conversation. And I think you're doing that so beautifully. I want to read something from Viktor Frankl, just one short passage. He says, "Death is a meaningful part of life, just like human suffering. Both do not rob the existence of human beings of meaning, but make it meaningful in the first place. This is from Yes to Life in Spite of Everything by Viktor Frankl. And he wrote this 9 months after he was released from Auschwitz in 46. And he was able to actually speak some, amazing truth about our human existence long time ago. And yet, look, the humanity hasn't catched up with that. And now we're facing another war and all sorts of other global matters and issues and problems. And we still don't, uplift ourselves and our level of consciousness. So we need to do that. We need more people like you to
And like
spread this goodness and well-being and light into the world. So now we've spoke a lot about your own experience. We spoke about the connection between mortality and happiness. Why are we afraid to talk about dying? How it's related to our most fundamental fear and anxiety. Towards the end, Cassandra, would you like to share with the watchers and listeners what are your best tips from your experience to date around engaging with that in a meaningful way to not prevent us from being happy and content in life?
Yeah, I would love to. And there are a few that sort of immediately jump to mind. And I think the first is actually like a death inspired meditation. I think it's really hard to incorporate, I guess, this death awareness, this death work without getting overwhelmed. I think the thing that I really want to emphasize is I'm not saying, every moment of your day you need to be thinking about this, right? Because it can be overwhelming, and it will be overwhelming.
Sure.
But intentionally carving out space where you have that moment of sort of a confrontational moment with yourself, and it can be a really peaceful and compassionate confrontational moment, but it will always be confrontational because of the nature of the topic. But I do think sort of sitting with yourself, really dropping in and thinking, okay, I'm sitting here in my body, checking in with your body, all the different parts. Maybe it might look like for you touching like all the different parts of your body. It might be a really sort of embodied like bath or something that makes you feel sort of connected to your physical being, and realizing and really appreciating, look, this vessel is temporary. It's not always going to be here, and really taking a moment to honor yourself for that, and really give credit and saying, look, I'm here. I'm here.
Yes.
We're here.
Yes.
I'm alive. And I'm grateful for this moment, because this moment is the only thing that's guaranteed.
Yes.
Right. I'm really sitting with that and getting present, like you said, because when you're sort of projecting into the future, that's all fear-based, and reflecting on the past sometimes too, that can be really painful, and always living in what did I do? I could have done this differently, etc. Forgive yourself and show yourself some compassion for that too. But when you bring it to this present moment, but carving out intentional time and just sitting and being really honest, I think, with yourself, and saying, look, I'm a mortal being. My time is finite. Some people host death meditations. I do sometimes online, but you don't have to do it with another person. This is something you can do with yourself. And that's why I love it, because it's accessible. You can just do it on your own with no resources, and then have a journal nearby, or your phone even, to voice record, just your sort of stream of consciousness, and say, look, I'm mortal. I'm uncomfortable. What does that bring up for me? What comes up for me? What is the fear there? Is it the fear that I'm not going to be there for my loved ones one day? Is the fear that I'm not enjoying my job, and I spend so much time at my job? And I think it really sort of brings up all of these things, and just really sit with those, and then, write it out, or, record yourself, whatever feels right and feels good for you. But again, really intentionally carving out that space, because it's not natural. I think it's something that has to be intentional, but with the intentional part of it, you can kind of make it a little ritual for yourself. You can make it a little ceremony, get comfortable, get really embodied, get candles, get, your favorite coffee or whatever it is. All of those little baby pleasures that you have in life, bring them together into one space, carve it out, and just say, I'm here. I'm allowed to enjoy. I forgive myself, for whatever. And I'm here right now. And that's beautiful, and that's painful, and that's hard, and that's great. And death, what can you teach me?
Yes. And I value life.
Yeah, exactly. So I think really just that is probably the biggest thing. And then the other part would be, reading, listening to podcasts, really sort of bringing this kind of work into your life. You read beautifully from Viktor Frankl. There are so many like amazing people that have written on this. Viktor Frankl, Irvin Yalom, that whole existential also philosophy route of things too can really help you kind of define your own personal philosophy around death and what it means to
Yes.
you. And I think that's what's key, right? You might read something and it might not resonate, but it can help you sort of relate and say, actually, I think this. And you'll be surprised. You're like, oh, I didn't maybe know that before, that I
Yes.
feel this way about this certain thing, or et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I guess it's just educating yourself using beautiful, beautiful works that are in existence, but then also really carving out and creating time and checking in with yourself. Those are my tips.
So powerful. Thank you so much, Cassandra. We had such a wonderful chat. I'd love to continue, but it is time to stop now. A big thanks to all of you watching and listening. And many, many thanks to you, Cassandra, for joining me here today.
Thank you so much. This has been such an amazing conversation, and I'm so grateful that we've connected. Yeah, thank you so much.
You are very welcome. That's it for now. Until next time, we are wishing you all good health and happiness.